Close your eyes and let the present moment dissolve into the cool amber glow of 1924, where time does not pass, but lingers softly, patiently like candlelight pressed against old glass. We are not simply traveling through space, but slipping into the quiet corridors of a world that has learned how to hold its breath. You find yourself standing on the narrow platform of White Cedar Valley, high in the mountains where the air is thin, the silence is deeper, and every stone beneath your feet was placed by hands that understood something we have long forgotten, the weight of forever. The town seems to be waiting, not abandoned, not asleep, but listening, as if it recognizes your presence, because somewhere within these hills, hidden between the trees and the passing years, there remains a story the valley never released, a love that refused to fade, and, perhaps, was never meant to be remembered this way. Listen closely now to the iron heartbeat of the valley, the distant, steady chime of the midnight train, echoing like a memory that cannot quite disappear, threading its way through granite peaks and silver-frosted pines that have watched over generations without ever speaking. This is the Great North as it existed a century ago, untouched by urgency, shaped instead by ritual, by seasons, by the slow accumulation of quiet lives. Can you sense it, the faint trace of wood smoke drifting through the air, the dry, comforting scent of aged cedar woven into the fabric of the town itself? It carries something more than warmth, something older, something that lingers just beneath awareness. Here, the world softens. The sharp edges of the present begin to blur beneath the hush of 1,000 fallen snows, settling gently over rooftops, over footsteps, over moments that were never meant to last, and yet somehow did. You move slowly now, down streets that remember the softened echo of Victorian boots, past windows that once held candlelight long into the night, and you begin to understand. This place does not forget, not entirely. It holds what remains, and as the weight of the day slips quietly from your shoulders, replaced by the light, delicate stillness of the past, you realize you are not simply visiting. You are returning to a story that has been waiting in the silence, carried on the wind, whispered through the trees, waiting not to be discovered, but to be remembered. The valley is a fortress of peace, its granite cliffs acting as silent sentinels that keep the noise of the modern world at bay. Within this circle of peaks, you are utterly protected. The air you breathe is pure, filtered by miles of evergreen forest, calming your pulse and steadying your mind. There is no rush here. The mountains have seen a million nights like this, and they invite you to share in their enduring stillness. You are cocooned in the soft, historical fabric of a town that knows your name, even if you haven't spoken it in years. The frost on the station window begins to clear, revealing not just a landscape, but a face reflected in the glass, a face from a photograph you thought was lost to time. It is the face of Charlotte, a woman whose return to this valley is about to awaken a connection that the archives of the heart have kept perfectly preserved. But before we follow her into the snow-coated streets, we must first prepare your spirit to walk beside her, beginning with a light that transcends time itself. Before we step further into the snow-dusted memories of 1924, take a moment to find a sanctuary within your own body. Lay down in a position that is kind to your physical form and to the quiet thoughts of your mind. Can you feel yourself sinking into the mattress, as if the very gravity of this ancient valley is pulling you into a state of absolute surrender? Can you feel the soft pillow cradling your head, offering a safe space to relax after the long, fragmented hours of your day? So often, the world demands that we move faster, that we care for everything except ourselves. But here, in the shadow of the white pines, there is plenty of time for care. There is no rush, no expectation, and nothing required of you except the simple act of being kind to your own presence. I want you to imagine a light beginning to glow around your body, A light that feels as though it has been pulled from the very stars that watched over this town a century ago. It can be any color you desire, perhaps a soft vintage gold like the flicker of a kerosene lamp, or a cool, ethereal blue like the ice on the river. Take a moment to truly see this light, to feel its temperature as it hums with a frequency of deep historical peace. As this light begins to travel over you, pay close attention to how each part of your body responds to its touch. Picture the light starting at the very top of your head. As it settles there, ask yourself, are the muscles in your face relaxed, or are they still holding on to the tensions of the modern world? Is your jaw clenched in a silent protest against the day, or can you let it soften? Whatever tightness you are holding, you are fully capable of letting it go now. Watch as the light pulls the tension from your forehead, your eyes, and your jaw, leaving your face as smooth and tranquil as the surface of a frozen mountain pond. Now, follow that light as it flows down into your shoulders and your arms. Feel it traveling like a warm current from the tips of your fingers on your left hand, all the way across to the tips of the fingers on your right. As the light reaches your chest, allow it to untangle the invisible strings of stress that may reside there. Feel the heaviness being lifted away, replaced by a rhythmic, steady expansion of your lungs. This light is a bridge between your physical self and the quiet soul of the valley. Continue to guide this light down through your hips and your legs, soothing every exhausted muscle that has carried you through the week. Feel it journeying down your thighs, smoothing over your calves, and flowing out through the tips of your toes until your entire being is unwound. You are no longer anchored to the worries of the present. The thoughts of the day are now far behind you, dissolving into the white landscape of the past. Your body is a vessel of stillness, ready to be filled with the story that is about to unfold. You are completely weightless now, floating in a cocoon of light and history. The room around you has vanished, replaced by the hushed, protective atmosphere of a Victorian bedroom where the fire is low and the blankets are heavy with the scent of lavender and winter air. Nothing can disturb this peace. You are held by the same silence that has protected White Cedar Valley for 100 years. Your breathing is a slow, melodic echo of the wind outside the window. You are safe. You are steady. You are ready to begin. As the light fades into a soft, moonlit glow, the rhythmic sound of a train returns to your ears, not as a distant echo, but as a vibration beneath your feet. You are no longer just imagining the past. You are sitting within it. Through the frost-patterned glass of the carriage, the first sign of a life once lived begins to emerge from the darkness of the pine. Charlotte's breath fogged up the heavy train window, a thin veil of white against the dark, shifting glass. Beyond that frosty barrier, a landscape of towering granite peaks and lofty ancient trees lazily flickered by in the moonlight. Overhead, the clouds were dark and heavy, hanging so low over the valley that she felt she could almost reach out and touch the curve of each gray formation. She knew this sky. She knew that snow was on the way, for in this part of the world, in the year 1924, it seemed to snow almost every day during the winter months. If she closed her eyes, she could remember every bit of her childhood snow days in White Cedar Valley, how she would awaken in a warm, heavy bed to the steady, rhythmic rumble of snowplows, sliding piles of freshly fallen flakes to the side of the cobblestone streets. She remembered crawling out from under her quilts with a thick wool blanket draped over her shoulders, looking out over a landscape amazed by how perfectly the white flakes had blanketed every harsh line of the world, turning the valley into a kingdom of softness and peace. She closed her eyes now, letting the memories wash over her like a warm tide. The consistent drone of the train wheels and the heavy metallic mechanics of the engine created a steady, rhythmic lullaby that seemed to be urging her deeper into a state of rest. Chug, 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 the wheels spun and spun, driving her further into the depths of the countryside, away from the frantic noise of the city, and into the silent embrace of the mountain. The door beside her slid open with a gentle wooden creak, briefly breaking her nostalgic reverie. A waiter in a velvety, dark coat moved with practiced grace, handing her a cup of steaming hot chocolate she had ordered moments earlier. She sipped it slowly, allowing the thick sweetness to engulf her taste buds and radiate warmth from her chest to her very fingertips. But the warmth did not only come from the drink. As the steam rose in delicate spirals, a man sat down in the booth across from her. He had dark skin that seemed to glow in the amber light of the carriage, and when he glanced up, she was met by kind, familiar amber eyes. There was an immediate shock of recognition that traveled through her soul. In a town as small and storied as White Cedar Valley, everyone knew everyone. It was a community where you were always protected, always loved, and always seen. For years, there had been one person who sat at the very center of that feeling of safety. Edgar. The train carriage is a world unto itself, a moving sanctuary lined with polished wood and soft velvet. Outside, the wind howls through the mountain passes, but inside, the air is still and fragrant with the scent of chocolate and old books. You are sitting right there beside them, wrapped in the heavy coat of history. The vibrations of the floor beneath your feet are not jarring, but grounding, a constant reminder that you are being carried toward a place of rest. You are invisible to the world, tucked away in a pocket of 1924 where no one can find you, no one can wake you, and nothing can touch the serenity of this journey. As their eyes meet through the drifting steam of the carriage, the years of separation begin to dissolve like sugar in hot water. He isn't just a passenger. He is the living embodiment of the home she thought she had left behind forever. Their silence is not empty. It is filled with the echoes of 1,000 shared sunsets, beginning with the golden fields of their youth. As the steam from her hot chocolate began to settle, Charlotte found herself suspended in a moment that felt older than the mountains surrounding them. Across the small mahogany table of the train carriage, Edgar's presence was a grounding force, a physical anchor in the shifting tides of her return. She watched as the soft, yellow light of the carriage lamps danced in his eyes, a color of warm honey, or perhaps the sap of the very cedar trees that gave their town its name. There was a stillness in him, a quiet strength that seemed to reflect the carpentry he had dedicated his life to. A man who understood the grain of the wood and the steady patience required to build something meant to last. Growing up in the tight-knit embrace of White Cedar Valley, there was a specific kind of safety in being known. To be in a place where your history was not a burden, but a shared map held in the hearts of your neighbors and friends. For years, Edgar had been the navigator of that map for her. Looking at him now, she didn't see a stranger shaped by time, but the same boy who had once chased the fleeting light of summer insects across the meadows. She saw the same friendliness and the same soul-deep warmth that had engaged her mind long before the world had taught her how to be guarded. It was as if the intervening years, the city streets, the college lectures, the frantic pace of a life lived elsewhere, were merely a thin layer of dust that a single look from him could sweep away. They did not speak immediately. The language of their reunion was written in the rhythmic clinking of the spoons and the low, constant hum of the locomotive. When they finally embraced, it was a tight, loving hold that seemed to cement her back into the present moment, a physical confirmation that she was truly home. He asked her about the big city, about the life she had built in the canyons of glass and steel. She found herself struggling to find the words. How could she explain that while she loved the energy and the endless access to the world's motion, she had felt a persistent ache for the scent of white pine? Yeah, so I then. She had missed the cozy, flower-dusted air of the hometown bakery, where her name was spoken as naturally as a greeting. Edgar listened with a compassion that was blended with his inherent, playful nature. He told her of his own truth, how he had stepped into his father's footsteps, taking over the family carpentry business. He spoke of the satisfaction of creating furniture that would hold the weight of other people's lives. Yet he also confessed to a quiet longing to see how the sun felt on his skin in different parts of the world. They spoke without boundaries, their conversation flowing like the river that wound through the valley floor, ebbing and flowing around the corners of their shared past. With every word, they inched closer together, drawn by an invisible thread that had never truly snapped. Feel the atmosphere of the carriage settle around you like a heavy wool blanket. The world outside is a blur of blue shadows and white drifts. But here, in this small circle of amber light, everything is certain. You are sitting in the seat beside them, lulled by the gentle swaying of the train as it carves its way through the heart of the mountains. There is no danger here, no noise that isn't musical, no cold that can reach your skin. You are held in the palm of a story that is as sturdy as a well-crafted chair and as warm as a hearth fire. Your heartbeat is sensing with the pulse of the engine, slow, steady, and purposeful. As the train began its long descent into the valley, the first lights of the town appeared like fallen stars nestled in the evergreen boughs, and Charlotte realized that her heart had arrived at the station long before the train ever did. The iron wheels shrieked softly against the frozen rails as they slowed, announcing their arrival at a place where the air tasted of pine and the moonlight turned the snow into a path of iridescent silver. As the train hissed its final breath of steam into the frozen night air, the silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of every summer that had come before. Charlotte stepped onto the platform, the wood creaking beneath her boots with a familiar, hollow groan. A sound that acted as a key, unlocking a vault of memories she hadn't realized were still so vivid. Standing there, beside Edgar, the cold air biting at her cheeks, she wasn't just a woman returning from the city in 1924. She was a young girl again, barefoot and sun-drenched, running through the tall, golden grass of July. She remembered the way the valley felt when the sun refused to set until late in the evening. Those were the days of endless light, where the air smelled of drying hay and wild clover. She and Edgar would spend hours by the creek, their laughter echoing off the stone bridges that had stood since the town's founding. They would hunt for emerald green bullfrogs near the water's edge, their small hands slick with mud and joy. But it was the nights that held the real magic. As the shadows of the oaks lengthened across the fields, the fireflies would begin their rhythmic dance. They were like tiny terrestrial stars, pulsing with a soft bioluminescent green that seemed to mimic the heartbeat of the earth itself. Charlotte remembered the glass jars they used to carry, the metal lids poked with holes so the tiny creatures could breathe. She could still feel the cool glass against her palms and hear the soft thud of 100 wings as they released the light back into the darkness at the end of the night. Then, the memory shifted, turning from the vibrant green of summer to the burnt oranges and deep ochres of the harvest. October in White Cedar Valley was a season of ritual. She recalled the towering rows of the cornfields, the stalks turning brittle and whispering to one another in the autumn wind. They would play hide and seek among the husks, the smell of ripening pumpkins and damp earth filling their lungs. The sun in those days was different, lower, heavier, casting a honeyed glow over the entire landscape that made everything look like an oil painting from a century prior. There was a specific sound to that time of year, the dry crunch of fallen leaves underfoot, a percussive rhythm that accompanied every walk to the town square. They would gather at the harvest festivals, where the air was thick with the scent of mulled cider and wood smoke, and the local fiddlers would play tunes that had been passed down through generations. Edgar stood beside her now on the platform, his presence weaving through these memories like a silver thread. He had been there for every seasonal shift, a constant figure in the background of her life's archival footage. He was the one who had helped her climb the highest branches of the ancient apple trees, and the one who had shared his scarf when the first frost of November unexpectedly arrived. These weren't just stories. They were the foundation of who they were. The history of the valley was etched into their skin, a map of scars, laughter, and shared silences that no amount of time in the city could ever erase. Let yourself settle into the deep, rhythmic pulse of these memories. There is no urgency in the past. It is a landscape that is already finished, waiting only for you to walk through its quiet halls. You are wrapped in the warmth of 1,000 summer sunsets, protected by the sturdy walls of the mountains that have never moved and never will. Your breath is long and easy, matching the slow sway of the tall grass in your mind's eye. Here, in the archive of 1924, you are cradled by the continuity of the seasons. You are safe in the knowledge that some things like the scent of pine and the loyalty of an old friend never change. As a gust of wind caught a stray lock of her hair, Edgar reached out, his hand hovering just inches away, and for a fleeting second, the heat of his palm felt exactly like the midday sun of their youth, burning through the winter chill. But as the golden glow of summer faded in her mind, it was replaced by a different kind of brilliance, the sharp, crystalline memory of the valley's first freeze. As the memory of the harvest faded into a soft, hazy gold, the internal landscape of Charlotte's mind shifted once again, turning toward the sharp, exhilarating chill of the valley's deep winter. If the summers of White Cedar Valley were a riot of color, the winters were a masterpiece of silence, a profound, architectural stillness that seemed to stop the very clock of the world. She remembered the morning of the Great Freeze of 1918, when the entire world had been transformed into a kingdom of glass overnight. Every branch of the ancient birches was encased in a thick, translucent layer of ice, and when the pale winter sun finally broke through the heavy iron clouds, the forest didn't just glow, it burned with a cold, flickering fire that made her eyes water with its sheer diamond-like brilliance. She recalled walking onto the frozen surface of Miller's Pond with Edgar, the ice so clear and deep that it looked like a black mirror reflecting the infinite, starlit sky. They were young then, their skates cutting sharp, rhythmic lines into the surface. The sound was a low, steady hum, a melodic resonance that vibrated through the soles of her feet and echoed against the frozen cattails at the water's edge. The air was so cold it felt brittle, like something that could shatter if you spoke too loudly. Yet she had never felt more alive, more anchored to the present. They would skate until their woolen scarves were frosted with the mist of their own breath, and their fingers were numb despite the heavy, fleece-lined mittens knitted by Edgar's grandmother. But the cold was never a threat. It was merely the quiet, necessary backdrop for the warmth that inevitably followed. She could still taste the ghost of the peppermint sticks they would stir into mugs of steaming milk back at the cabin, the intense heat of the hearth fire radiating against her shins until her skin tingled with the blissful return of circulation. And then, just as the weight of the snow began to feel permanent, as if the world would forever be draped in white, the valley would undergo its most delicate and hesitant transformation. Spring in the high country was not a sudden event, but a slow, rhythmic awakening. Charlotte remembered the sound of the sugar melts, the steady, melodic dripping of icicles from the eaves of the porch, a persistent, watery percussion that signaled the earth was finally exhaling after a long sleep. The scent of damp pine needles and thawing soil would rise from the forest floor, a heady, primal perfume of rebirth that spoke of roots stirring beneath the frost. This was the season of the peepers, the tiny tree frogs whose high-pitched, harmonic trilling filled the twilight hours with a symphony of survival. To Charlotte, that sound was the very heartbeat of hope. She and Edgar would wander through the softening woods, their boots sinking into the mud, searching for the first brave crocuses, pushing their purple heads through the retreating drifts. There was a profound sense of relief in those days, a shared understanding that they had survived the darkness together, and that the light was finally, inevitably, coming back to claim the valley. Standing now on the platform in 1924, feeling the actual snow begin to settle on her eyelashes like the softest down, Charlotte realized that she carried all these versions of the valley within her. Every freeze and every thaw had shaped the contours of her heart. She looked at Edgar, who was adjusting his heavy wool coat against the rising wind, and saw in the lines around his eyes the same quiet endurance of the mountains. They were made of this cycle, the harshness of the frost and the tenderness of the bloom. The history of their lives was not a straight line, but a beautiful, repeating circle, manifesting its beauty year after year, century after century, beneath the watchful and eternal eyes of the stars. Allow your consciousness to drift between these seasons, feeling the cool, refreshing touch of the winter wind and the soft, humid promise of the spring thaw. You are tucked safely away from the elements, observing the changing world from a place of absolute, unshakable stillness. The seasons move in a grand, slow dance around you, but they cannot disturb your center. Like the deep, ancient roots of the white cedars, you are grounded, nourished by the earth, and protected by the vast, quiet history of this sacred land. Your breath is the wind in the sleeping branches. Your heartbeat is the slow, steady pulse of the forest. You are at peace with the passage of time. Edgar reached into his deep coat pocket and pulled out a small wooden carving, a tiny, intricate crocus he had fashioned during the long, solitary autumn months. He placed it in her hand, the wood still holding the warmth of his skin, a silent promise that spring was already here, even in the heart of a blizzard. As she closed her fingers over the wooden flower, the nostalgic glow of the past began to collide with the stark, demanding reality of the life she had left behind in the city, forcing her to see the two worlds in a light she had never considered before. As the carriage door hissed shut behind them, leaving the iron rhythm of the train to fade into the mountain mist, Charlotte felt a strange, lingering vibration in her bones. It was the ghost of the city, the frantic electric pulse of 1924 Manhattan that she had called home for the last 3 years. In her mind's eye, she could still see the canyons of steel and the relentless motion of the crowds. A world where every second was a commodity and silence was a luxury no one could afford. There, the air tasted of coal smoke and ambition, and the nights were never truly dark, lit by the harsh, flickering neon of a future that refused to wait. She remembered the feeling of being a single drop in a vast gray ocean, surrounded by millions of souls, yet tethered to none. It was a life of becoming, a constant climb toward a horizon that always seemed to recede just as she reached for it. But here, as she stood on the salt-dusted cobbles of White Cedar Valley, the contrast was so sharp, it was almost physical. The city demanded her attention, but the valley demanded her presence. Here, the architecture did not scrape the sky. It embraced the earth. The buildings were made of the very stone and timber that surrounded them, weather-beaten and wise, standing as testament to a slower, more deliberate kind of survival. In the city, a building 10 years old was considered an obstacle to progress. Here, a house was a vessel for a century of family dinners, whispered prayers, and the steady ticking of grandfather clocks. She looked at the soft yellow squares of light in the windows of the main street shops, and she realized that in the city, she had been a ghost in a machine, but here, she was a daughter of the soil. The silence of the valley was not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. It was the sound of a wood stove popping in a distant kitchen, the muffled crunch of a stray cat crossing a snowy alley, and the deep, resonant sigh of the wind through the cedar boughs. In the city, she had learned to tune out the world to survive. Here, she found herself opening every sensory gate, allowing the history and the stillness to pour back into the hollow spaces of her spirit. She felt the frantic gears of her mind begin to slow, matching the leisurely rotation of the valley's own clock. The heavy mantle of anonymity fell away, replaced by the warm, familiar weight of belonging. Close your eyes and feel that same transition within yourself. Leave behind the noise of your own city, the to-do lists, the digital echoes, and the pressures of the modern hour. Step onto the quiet, snow-covered platform beside Charlotte. Feel the immense, cooling weight of the mountains, acting as a barrier against all external demands. You are in a place where time is measured by the falling snow and the rising moon. Your heartbeat is slowing, shedding the frantic rhythm of the day and adopting the steady, ancient pulse of the earth. You are safe. You are anonymous to the world, but deeply known to this place. Everything you left behind is miles away, muffled by layers of white silence. As she adjusted her grip on her suitcase, Charlotte noticed that her hands, which had been trembling with a nervous energy for months, were finally perfectly still. The valley had already begun to heal what the city had broken. With the frantic world now a fading echo, she turned her gaze toward the heart of the town, where the very bones of the buildings seemed to hum with a welcoming song. Leaving the platform behind, Charlotte and Edgar began their walk toward the center of White Cedar Valley. The town revealed itself not all at once, but in a series of slow cinematic layers, like a photograph developing in a dark room of blue shadows and starlight. The architecture here was a silent language, speaking of a time when every beam was hand-hewn and every foundation stone was chosen for its grit. As they moved down Main Street, the buildings leaned in close, their Victorian silhouettes adorned with intricate gingerbread trim that now held delicate ruffles of fresh snow. These were structures built to withstand the temperamental moods of the Great North, with steep pitched roofs designed to shed the heavy winter burdens and wide, welcoming porches that promised shade during the humid afternoons of July. Charlotte paused before the old general store, its large bay windows glowing with a soft, buttery light that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the community. Inside, she could see the dark silhouettes of antique scales, rows of glass jars filled with colorful lozenges, and bolts of heavy wool fabric waiting for the seamstresses of the valley. The glass of the window was wavy and imperfect, a characteristic of early 20th century craftsmanship that turned the world outside into a soft, impressionistic painting. To her, this imperfection was beautiful. It was a reminder that life didn't need to be polished to be meaningful. She reached out and brushed a layer of frost from a stone pillar, feeling the rough, cold texture of the granite stone that had been quarried from the very mountains that loomed over them. They passed the local library, a sturdy brick edifice with ivy vines that looked like skeletal fingers frozen in sleep against the red masonry. The town square was dominated by a central gazebo, its white paint peeling slightly in a way that suggested a graceful aging, a dignified surrender to the elements. High above, the church steeple rose like a silent prayer into the midnight sky, its bell silent for now, but ready to mark the passage of hours, weddings, and departures. There was a profound sense of intentionality in the way the town was laid out, the narrow alleys that offered shortcuts between friends' houses, the communal wells that had once been the social centers of the valley, and the rows of white cedar trees that stood like ancient sentinels along every boulevard. The air here was different than the city. It was heavy with the scent of burning birch and the crisp, ozone-rich aroma of an impending blizzard. As they walked, the only sound was the rhythmic, muffled crunch of their boots on the packed snow, a sound that was steady, grounding, and deeply hypnotic. Edgar pointed out a new storefront he had helped renovate. his voice low and rich with pride as he described the way the cedar grain caught the morning light. Charlotte listened, not just to his words, but to the silence that lived between them. It was a silence that felt like a sanctuary, a space where the history of the buildings and the history of their own hearts could finally breathe in unison. Visualize yourself walking beside them, your footsteps falling into the same rhythmic pattern on the snow. The town is a fortress of warmth in a wilderness of white. Every window you pass is a promise of safety. Every glowing hearth, a testament to the endurance of the human spirit. You are protected by these walls of stone and timber, held in the palm of a valley that has seen a century of winters and has never once wavered. The cold air on your face only makes the thought of the indoors feel sweeter. Your mind is as clear as the winter sky, and your body is becoming heavier, sinking into the peaceful gravity of this historical haven. As they turned the corner toward Charlotte's family home, a single lamp was visible in the upstairs window, its light casting a long, golden path across the snow, a beacon that had been waiting for her return for 1,000 days. They reached the gate of the old Victorian house, where the shadows of the past seemed to gather in the corners of the porch, whispering of a secret connection that was about to be renewed through the simplest of signals. The heavy oak door of her childhood home closed with a soft, decisive thud, sealing out the biting mountain wind and replacing it with the scent of dried orange peels and old paper. Charlotte stood in the dim foyer of 1924, watching the dust motes dance in the dying embers of the hearth. Upstairs, the floorboards groaned under her weight with a welcoming familiarity, a melodic creak she had memorized as a young girl. She entered her bedroom, where the iron bed frame stood exactly where she had left it, draped in a heavy patchwork quilt that smelled of cedar chests and lavender. The room was a time capsule of her former self, but as she moved toward the window, she realized she was no longer looking for the girl she used to be. She was looking for a light in the darkness. Outside, the blizzard had settled into a steady, rhythmic snowfall, each flake descending like a silent feather. Across the narrow alleyway and past a row of skeletal elms, Edgar's workshop window sat nestled under the eaves of his own family's barn. For a long moment, there was only the blue-black expanse of the winter night, but then a flicker appeared. A soft, amber beam of light cut through the falling lace of the snow once, twice. Then a long, steady pulse. Charlotte's heart skipped a beat as she reached for the silver flashlight resting on her vanity. It was a ritual they had invented when they were barely 10 years old, a secret language etched in light that the rest of the world could never translate. She clicked her light on, pointing it toward the frost-etched glass. Short, short, long. The signal for I am here. Across the void, Edgar responded with a sweeping, circular motion of his lantern-a gesture that felt like a warm embrace crossing the freezing air. She began to tap out a message in Morse code, the rhythmic click-slide of the switch creating a tiny metallic percussion in the quiet room. Long, short, long, short. Every pulse of light was a bridge, a thread of gold connecting two souls who had spent too many years in the shadow of distance. She watched his light intently, her eyes growing heavy, but her spirit wide awake, deciphering the slow, deliberate flashes. I missed. You. The repetition of the light was hypnotic. Flash. Pause. Flash, flash. Long pause. It mimicked the slow, steady blinking of an owl in the rafters, or the rhythmic pulsing of a lighthouse on a distant, fog-bound coast. As the conversation continued, the words became less important than the rhythm itself. It was a lullaby of luminescence, a visual heartbeat that assured her she was no longer adrift in the anonymous currents of the city. She was anchored here, in this valley, by a man who communicated in the language of stars and shadows. The world beyond the mountains ceased to exist. There was only the glow of her lamp, the response from his window, and the infinite, hushed descent of the snow between them. Sink deeper into the warmth of your own sanctuary as you visualize these twin lights flickering in the dark. You are tucked beneath the heavy, comforting weight of that patchwork quilt, feeling the radiant heat of a home that knows your every secret. The rhythmic clicking of the flashlight is a rhythmic anchor, pulling you away from the chaotic noise of the outer world and into a state of profound, focused calm. The snow outside acts as a thick, velvet curtain, muffling every sound until there is nothing left but the gentle pulse of your own breathing. You are hidden. You are seeing. You are cherished in the silence of 1924, as she sent the final signal of the night, a single, long pulse that meant always. She saw Edgar lean against his windowsill, his silhouette illuminated by a soft glow that wasn't from a lamp, but from the radiant, unspoken truth that their story was only just beginning. With the light finally extinguished, the darkness of the room felt not like a void, but like a velvet path leading her toward the ancient, frozen sentinel that guarded the edge of the woods. The following evening, the blizzard had retreated, leaving behind a world so white and hushed it felt as though it had been carved from a single, massive block of alabaster. Charlotte and Edgar walked toward the edge of the valley, where the groomed streets gave way to the wild, untamed architecture of the forest. They were heading toward the river, to a place that existed in the geography of their hearts long before it was ever marked on a map. As they crested the final ridge, the great willow tree revealed itself, a towering ancient sentinel draped in a crystalline armor of ice. It stood alone in a clearing, its long, sweeping branches reaching down to touch the frozen surface of the water, creating a natural cathedral of silver and glass. In the moonlight of 1924, the willow was not merely a tree. It was a living prism. Every stray beam of light that hit its frozen tendrils was shattered into 1,000 tiny rainbows, casting an iridescent glow over the snow-covered banks. Charlotte gasped, the sound muffled by the thick wool of her scarf. She remembered coming here as a child, but the tree seemed to have grown in her absence, absorbing the silence and the strength of the mountains. It was a monument to endurance. Despite the weight of the ice, despite the decades of howling winds and heavy snows, the willow remained flexible, its branches bowing low, but never breaking. It was the very definition of the valley's spirit grace under pressure, beauty in the face of the cold. They stepped beneath the canopy of the hanging branches, entering a private world where the air was even stiller, even purer. The sound here was unique, a delicate, musical tinkling, like a million glass chimes caught in a phantom breeze. It was the sound of the ice-coated twigs brushing against one another, a high-frequency lullaby that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of their bones. Chime, tinkle, chant, sigh. The rhythm was irregular, yet perfectly harmonious, a natural symphony that required no conductor. Edgar reached up and gently touched one of the lower branches, his gloved hand causing a cascade of fine, diamond-like dust to fall through the air. In this moment, the city felt like a fever dream, a loud and distant hallucination that had no power over the crystalline reality of the willow. They stood in the center of this frozen sanctuary, their breath mingling in a single translucent cloud. Edgar began to speak, his voice a low, resonant baritone that harmonized with the tinkling of the ice. He spoke of the seasons he had spent watching this tree, of the times he had come here to carve his thoughts into the fallen wood, always wondering if the wind would carry his messages across the mountains to her. There was no need for grand gestures or dramatic declarations. The willow, with its deep roots and shimmering crown, said everything they couldn't. It spoke of a love that was rooted in the soil of the past, but was flexible enough to bend with the winds of the future. The history of their lives was written in the rings of this tree, a record of growth, of wintering, and of the inevitable, glorious return of the sun. Imagine yourself standing within that cathedral of ice, protected from the world by a curtain of silver branches. The air is cold, but you are wrapped in a warmth that comes from deep within. The tinkling sound of the willow is a rhythmic anchor for your mind, clearing away the clutter of the day and replacing it with a singular, shimmering peace. You are standing on solid ground, supported by roots that go down into the very heart of the earth. The silence is not lonely. It is full. Your breathing is slow, matching the gentle sway of the frozen branches. You are a part of this landscape, a part of this history, tucked away in a sanctuary where time has no meaning, and the stars are the only witnesses to your rest. As Charlotte leaned her head against Edgar's shoulder, she noticed a small, weathered knot in the trunk of the tree hollow. She had hidden a letter in 10 years ago. Edgar reached into the dark space and pulled out a small piece of parchment, perfectly preserved by the cold, as if the tree itself had been waiting for this exact moment to return her own heart to her. With the letter held tight against her chest, the shimmering light of the willow began to fade into a softer, more intimate glow, leading them back toward the warmth of the hearth and a final healing truth. The walk back from the willow tree was a silent procession through a world that felt newly consecrated. The snow beneath their boots no longer sounded like a barrier, but like a soft, rhythmic applause for their return. As they reached the porch of the old Victorian house, the air changed, losing its jagged winter edge and taking on the scent of seasoned oak and old-fashioned hospitality. Edgar opened the heavy door, and the interior of the house reached out to embrace them with a wave of golden, radiant heat. This was the hearth of 1924, a place where the walls were thick enough to forget the wind and the floorboards were polished by generations of peaceful footsteps. They settled into the high-backed velvet armchairs near the fireplace, the orange flames casting long, flickering shadows that climbed the walls like silent vines. Charlotte watched the fire, mesmerized by the way the logs crumbled into glowing embers, a slow and inevitable transformation that mirrored her own spirit. The frantic, metallic clatter of the city had finally been incinerated, replaced by the steady, low roar of the chimney and the occasional, comforting pop of a sap pocket. Edgar moved quietly through the room, his motions deliberate and fluid, bringing 2 heavy ceramic mugs filled with a liquid that smelled of dark chocolate and toasted nutmeg. As she took the mug, the heat seeped into her palms, traveling up her arms and settling in her chest like a long-lost friend. They sat in a comfortable, profound silence, the kind that can only exist between 2 people who have navigated the geography of each other's souls. Every few moments, their eyes would meet in the firelight, and a wordless understanding would pass between them, a confirmation that the distance was over. The search was finished, and the anchor had finally found the seabed. Edgar reached out, his hand covering hers on the arm of the chair. His skin was rough from the carpentry shop, smelling of cedar and beeswax, and his grip was a testament to his permanence. He wasn't a fleeting shadow or a temporary comfort. He was the very foundation of the valley, as solid as the granite cliffs and as enduring as the white pines. Charlotte felt a wave of healing wash over her, a gentle tide that smoothed out the jagged remains of her exhaustion. The weight she had been carrying, the need to prove herself, the fear of being forgotten. The loneliness of the crowd simply evaporated in the warmth of the room. She realized that the success she had been chasing in the city was a pale, flickering candle compared to the sun-like intensity of this belonging. Here, she didn't have to be anything other than herself. She was Charlotte, the girl who loved the willow tree, the woman who returned to the amber gaze of the man who had always been waiting. The history of their love was not a fragile thing to be protected, but a sturdy vessel that had carried them both through the storm and back to the shore. Allow yourself to sit in that velvet chair beside them, feeling the radiant, rhythmic pulse of the fire against your skin. The world outside is a vast, cold mystery, but within these 4 walls, there is only certainty. You are enveloped in a cocoon of history and heat, protected by the sturdy timbers of a house that has survived a century of blizzards. Your breathing is slow and deep, sinking into the rhythm of the crackling logs. Every muscle in your body is melting into the cushions, surrendering to the absolute safety of the moment. You are not required to do anything, to think anything, or to be anything. You are simply a witness to this peace, held in the amber glow of a night that will never end. As the fire began to burn low, Edgar leaned in and whispered a single sentence that had been waiting 10 years to be heard. Not a question, but a statement of fact. You are the only home I have ever needed. With those words settling into the quiet air like falling snow, the boundaries of the house seemed to expand, opening up a vision of a future that didn't require walls to be whole. The embers in the hearth now pulse with a low, rhythmic crimson, breathing their last bits of warmth into the hushed sanctuary of the parlor. Charlotte leans back, her eyes heavy with the sweet fatigue of a soul that has finally stopped running. In this suspended moment of 1924, the future does not feel like a daunting mountain to climb, but like the gentle, rolling plains they discussed in their whispers. They began to speak of a life that exists in the delicate space between the vibrant pulse of the city and the rooted silence of the valley, a life on wheels, a nomadic sanctuary that carries the spirit of White Cedar Valley into every corner of the map. They imagine the RV, a vessel of polished wood and soft linen, winding through the skeletal beauty of winter forests and the lush emerald cathedrals of distant states. As the morning light begins to touch the frosted eaves with a pale lavender glow, they make their departure. This is not a goodbye to the valley, but a carrying forward. As the vehicle rises over the mountain pass, Charlotte looks through the rear window, watching the town shrink into a miniature whirl of dollhouses and flickering candles. She sees the church steeples, the glowing downtown, and the peaceful farms where the smoke from early morning fires rises in straight silver columns. And there, on the very edge of the horizon, stands the great willow tree, outshining every other sentinel in the forest, its icy branches shimmering one last time before the mountain ridge swallows the view. She feels a profound gratitude, a realization that the town didn't just give her a past, it gave her the strength to leave it, knowing that the roots of their love are now portable, living within the joined hands of her and Edgar. The sound of the engine becomes a new lullaby, a steady, low-frequency hum that replaces the iron heartbeat of the train. The road ahead is a ribbon of silver, stretching out into a world where every sunrise brings a new forest, every sunset a different silhouette of peaks. But no matter where they go, the scent of white cedar and the rhythm of the mountain stars will travel with them. Charlotte closes her eyes, the motion of the road swaying her into a state of perfect equilibrium. The boundary between the story and your own sleep is dissolving now. The road they travel is the same path your mind is taking, a long, peaceful drift into the landscape of dreams where time has no authority and every breath is a step deeper into the velvet darkness. As you drift, remember that the valley is always here, tucked away in the high country of your subconscious. The train is always ready to depart, the fire is always laid in the hearth, and the willow is always waiting to whisper its crystalline secrets. This journey does not end. It merely cycles like the seasons of the great north, waiting for your return when the world becomes too loud. Every night is a new invitation to walk these snow-coated streets and find the light in the window that was lit specifically for you. The voice is fading now, becoming nothing more than a faint echo of the wind through the pines. The story has done its work, building a bridge of history and silver light for you to cross. Your body is heavy, so very heavy, sinking into the softest depths of the mattress. The room is dark. The world is quiet. The mountains are watching over you, silent and eternal. There's nothing left to do, There's nowhere else to be. You are home. You are safe. You are drifting. Drifting into the deep, restorative embrace of 1924. Sweet dreams of White Cedar Valley. Sweet dreams of the Willow. Sleep now. Sleep. Sleep.